Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Attlas Alex, and today we are going to be embarking on quite the extraordinary exploration. I will try to get all of my X puns out of the way at the beginning of the live stream, lest all of you start putting a bunch of expletives in the chat. Suffice it to say, the emphasis on today's live stream will be looking at this X factor. It is quite incredible, in fact, when you consider this symbol, this letter, everything from X marks the spot to, that comes from the old tropes of pirate treasure maps, right? That's the X is your destination. It's the location where you want to dig for treasure, dig for gold. And when you consider the Jolly Roger, which of course is the skull and bones, which has its origins in Freemasonry, the skull and bones, the Jolly Roger, is a skull, of course, but with an X. You'll have to have some patience with me today because I may be doing quite a bit of referencing of images and whatnot, and because I don't have everything on my computer, let's share the screen and entire screen there, that one. So we'll just do this ad hoc, and we will find that this symbol, this X, and of course, if you but turn that X 90 degrees, then you get a cross. The whole point of the X is that it's a cross. And mathematically speaking, the X is more powerful than the plus sign. It may not surprise you then to learn or to know that even in the tradition of the X-Men, if we can find this and then open image in new tab, let's do that. Okay. This is a trope that has been used in the X-Men comics. In this particular case, we have Wolverine crucified, but not on a cross, but on an X, which is of course a cross. But this X factor, this exponential increase in power that expedites our journey, our progress, our evolution, but still has all of the characteristics of a cross. You have a crossing of opposites, of perpendicular polarities. and their union creates the cross. The cross, as we know it, as a Christian symbol, is vertical and horizontal, masculine and feminine. As an X, it's the same symbol, but in that configuration. But the other use of X is, of course, we have the symbol for the negative. So we are familiar with X as a negative mark, as something being incorrect, for instance. As opposed to a check mark. And again, if we take it back to the Jolly Roger, the whole reason this symbol exists in Freemasonry is because of the importance of death in the evolutionary journey, the spiritual path. And that X denotes a cross, but also death. And let's face it, that's what the Christian cross denotes as well, because Christ was crucified on the cross. This symbol has contained within it an enormous amount of significance. And then here it shows up as the basis for this decades-long saga of comic book superheroes called the X-Men. Led by Charles Xavier. And the whole concept around this particular superhero universe is the conflict between mutants, or those possessing the mutant X gene, and the associated powers that these mutants develop as a result of having the mutant X gene. Now, many have speculated on the significance of this particular theme of outsiders, outliers. Mutants are outcasts. They're different. And the rest of humanity, you might call them the normies, or in Harry Potter terminology, they're the muggles, right? If in the wizarding world, you have the people who are wizards, they possess magic, and then you have the muggles, the normies, who are just mundane. And they don't possess magic. They don't know how to use magic, and they don't have that capability. Well, this is a sort of universal theme that comes up in any mythology or story, narrative or narrative universe where you have extraordinary characters that are, of course, it happens also for solitary characters. So, for example, Batman, but particularly Superman. Superman is all alone on the planet. And being that his homeworld, Krypton, was destroyed, he's all alone. And he is truly extraordinary compared to the Earthlings. So he too must try to blend in and make his way and find his place on Earth. But it becomes a more sociologically significant and culturally significant theme when it's a group of extraordinary individuals. And in the case of the X-Men, they're scattered all over the world, and many of them live in anonymity. And many of them are completely dumbfounded by their own powers. They're afraid of them. They're afraid of being found out as being a mutant because of the prejudice, the bigotry, the fear that the general population shows towards mutants, because it's part of, unfortunately, this humanity's fallen mechanical nature, is that we fear what we do not understand. And so the mutants are generally feared and shunned and even persecuted. So many of them out there all alone, and they don't know that necessarily that these mutations are common. They don't know necessarily that there's an entire community out there like them. So they might feel completely alone, like Superman does. Or even if they don't, they just are completely confused by these powers, and they're afraid of being who they are, of embracing their mutation and embracing their power and using it in some productive way. So for a very long time, we might even say the majority of people who read the X-Men comics felt that what X-Men was exploring thematically was cultural differences and being the outcast, being in the minority group, being different. But not just different, but unique and, again, extraordinary. Now, it just so happens that many of the people who read comics, they would freely admit to being what you might call a nerd. Comics have always appealed to certain demographics, and fandom and nerddom, if we can call it that, it used to be something, certainly in the 80s, which was very, you were an outcast. You were kind of shunned. But you were really good at school, you're really good at math and science or computers or whatever it was you were really good at. But there was a whole bunch of stereotypes around nerds and nerddom. There was even these movies in the 80s that were made called Revenge of the Nerds. But many individuals who are isolated and outcast in this way, but are outliers in the tail end of the Pareto distribution of the population, and they're extraordinary in some way, or certainly above average intelligence, or whatever the case may be. Many of them, myself included, in my younger days, developed the kind of superiority complex where the people bullying you were doing so because they were afraid of you, because they were afraid of your intelligence, they were afraid of your abilities, your capabilities. They didn't want to be shown up, or whatever the case may be. And you took the abuse, or you tried to shrug it off or do whatever you did, but perhaps secretly, privately in your mind, you had this little voice saying, "Oh yeah, I'll show you someday. Don't worry, someday I'll have the upper hand." Maybe not right now here in high school, but don't worry. Someday the tables will be turned. You'll see. And whether individuals develop that kind of a mentality or not, under the circumstances, to be able to read a comic, a series of stories about individuals, but in this alternate universe where their powers and abilities and superiority over the normal humans is exacerbated. It's hyperbolic, larger than life, as science fiction and fantasy tends to be, and genre media of all kinds tend to be. They're either surrealistic or hyper realistic. And in those stories and explorations, individuals were able to see themselves and see these outcasts, these outliers, these freaks performing extraordinary work on behalf of humanity, saving the day from whatever cosmic threat was presently threatening the planet. And for many, that's where the X-Men end from any sort of thematic perspective. That it's a story about outcasts and bigotry and prejudice, and how a minority group of extraordinary and skilled or gifted individuals have to make it in the world, and have how they band together and work together in order to find some kind of success and peace and harmony and so on. But of course, that's only scratching the surface. That's only skimming the surface of what the X-Men is about. Very quickly, Benjamin says, hi, and I say hi back. Hi, Benjamin, nice to have you with us today. And as Azil adds, we are basically anime nerds more than X-Men nerds. But that was enough to be seen as an alien. Yeah, and by no means, I mean, let's face it, the movies, X-Men really only became part of the popular culture when they started making the movies, and I guess that was back in the 90s. And they've made a whole series of X-Men movies since then. Some have been better than others. But X-Men really, because it mostly existed in comic book form. However, there was a very popular cartoon which they recently made a new version of. They call it, I think they call it X-Men 97. I haven't seen it. I didn't watch the original X-Men cartoon either. So many people's experience of the X-Men has only been through the cartoons or the movies. I myself have mostly only experienced the X-Men through the films, but I have done additional research into the X-Men of the comic books. For instance, there is a series that Danica, also known as Comic Book Girl 19, she did she's a X-Men super fan. And she did this entire history retrospective on the X-Men. And I guess it's like 2 hours long, the whole thing. It's in 2 parts here on YouTube. Yeah, it's called Epic History X-Men, and that's Danica there. Actually, no, 3 parts. 3 parts, sorry. So They're each around an hour and 10 minutes. So it's a 3-hour retrospective / history on the X-Men. So if you want to take a deep dive into the world of the X-Men in the comic books, that's an excellent resource if you want to flesh out your understanding of the X-Men universe. But our purpose here today is not to do that. Our purpose here is to comprehend the significance of the symbols and allegories in the X-Men universe as they apply to our universe, and more importantly, our inner worlds, our inner universe, the higher dimensions and infernal dimensions, as the case may be. And to that end, and I'm not the only one to have made some of the connections that we'll be making today. On the contrary, there are many who have done and publicly presented their explorations, their esoteric explorations of that property. It's always the case when I want to find my trees of life, they always seem to vanish on me. What you can do, as with many properties, is take the different characters from the property and map it onto the tree of life. And that's precisely what I and others have done. And some have come up with different versions of this. And we don't necessarily have to go through step by step, because if you don't know who some of these characters are, then it's not necessarily going to make any sense to walk through all of the Sephira. But suffice it to say, and other people have come up with different answers. They put different characters into the different positions. But considering there are literally hundreds of X-Men characters, this should not be surprising that one is able to do this. So many of the X-Men are quite archetypal, and we'll get to a few in particular that, hold a special place in the mythology. Oh, we got a comment here. Azazel says, yeah, finding good animes today is much harder than it used to be. I guess it is the same with comics. Well, from what I understand, you see, I stopped reading comics when I was in elementary school. I graduated to books and I never looked back, with the exception of Tintin graphic novels. You might know him better as Tintin, but it's supposedly it's properly pronounced Tintin. Regardless, those graphic novels, I could take them out of the library, so I didn't have to buy them. I did not have much in the way of a budget to be able to go and buy comic books, even if I had wanted to. So we had a number of large format and smaller format comic books when I was a kid, including Star Wars and some other popular properties at the time. But once I got into things like the Choose Your Own Adventure books and other books in general, and the Tintin graphic novels, the short form episodic newsprint comics that you had to spend money on, they lost their luster for me for whatever reason. I certainly never had any desire to collect them, as many people do. Serious comic book fans have boxes and boxes and boxes filled with thousands of comics, some of them even tens of thousands that they've just accumulated over a lifetime. And certain editions and certain printing, certain issues, I should say, of certain runs, just like any collectible, they're all graded for quality and everything else. And, they vacuum seal them and all this kind of stuff because they're, collectors. But I left all that behind. But I didn't abandon my appreciation for the comic book format. I recognize the value of the format because, like I say, I did read Tintin graphic novels, and there is something about the format because it's highly visual. It's literally a storyboard. That's why many movies today start out as graphic novels, because the way the producers and the directors and the production team and the screenwriters see it, they have a ready-made storyboard at their disposal. And if you look at some of Frank Miller's or what's his name, Zack Snyder's movies, like 300 and The Watchmen, some of those films, and indeed many films, are almost panel for panel, scene for scene, taken out of their graphic novel or comic book from where they from what the source material was. So all that being an aside, many people have, they cherish their comic books, and there's a reason why the comic book format has endured for so long. And it's not just the collectible aspect of it. I've described this in the past, where one of the problem with film is that in film, we rarely get to hear what characters are thinking. So we don't have an insight into their psychological landscape as we do in other medium. For example, in opera or in theater, particularly Shakespeare, there are moments where the character can break character and speak directly to the audience. In Shakespeare, it can be an aside or a monologue directed at the audience. And in opera, there's actually a convention that if the characters are singing at each other, they can hear what each other is saying. But if they turn to the audience and sing directly at the audience, then it's that trope, that rule is there to let the audience know that the other characters on stage can't hear what they're saying, but we can hear what they're saying. And this is what very often where we gain insights into the internal psychological landscape of the characters on stage. Now, this is very important because very often you see the two-faced nature of characters, but also more often than not, especially when you talk about Shakespeare's tragedies and any of the great tragic operas, the self-reflection and the cathartic moments, the truly powerful moments where the characters see the light, are very often sung at the audience. Some of the climaxes of these tragedies are, for all intents and purposes, internal, in the internal psychological landscape. Now, there are exceptions in film where we get to hear what's going on in the mind of characters, but it's very rare. Dune, the 1984 version of Dune, not this new one by Denis Villeneuve, but the 1984 version, which was David Lynch's Dune. He has characters thinking to themselves, and you hear what they're thinking in voiceover, as a voiceover narration. And in other films, often we get to hear characters narrating the action on screen or narrating what's going on in the background. Like Martin Scorsese has used this to great effect in movies like Casino, and he also does it with several characters, not just the main character. Usually there's only one narrator for a film. So for example, in Shawshank Redemption, we hear Red, Morgan Freeman's character, narrating the film. But we can't trust a third-party narrator. We can't trust that what Morgan Freeman is telling us about what Andy Dufresne is thinking and feeling. Right? We would have to hear it from Andy Dufresne himself. So there are very, very, very few films that narrate and do so well. So David Lynch's 1984 Dune was actually quite remarkable in this way, because Dune is such a psychological and esoteric book. It really requires that window into the soul and the psyches of these characters. So Denis Villeneuve's Dune falls down by comparison, though technically it may be superior, in special effects and verisimilitude and so on and so forth. But in terms of art direction and style and even acting and directing and getting to the essence of what Dune is and is about, David Lynch's version, even though it's dated, it was fantastical. It wasn't trying to be realistic. It was high science fiction fantasy. It was operatic. It was melodramatic, which is what Dune is. Dune is epic. So comic books then have this aspect because you have the thought bubbles where you can have characters saying one thing and thinking something else. And this psychological exploration in the context of especially something like X-Men, you see, because X-Men is one of the most psychologically charged comic book universes. Telepathy and psychic powers are one of the hallmarks of the X-mutant gene. So one of the powers that maybe not many, but that keeps coming up, certainly Charles Xavier and Jean Grey, one of their hallmarks is their psychic abilities. And so having insight into the psychology and manipulating psychology and taking control of people and so on and so forth, through psychology, this is all baked into the narrative of the X-Men universe. So right away, it takes what is true for all comic books and opera and Shakespeare, right? And those rare films that give us a window into the soul of characters. X-Men takes that and dials it up to 11 because, and most comic books do this to one degree or another, dream sequences and all sorts of, right, because they're able to do so in their medium, and they've been able to do so for decades and decades and decades because there's no limit, there's no technological limit limiting the ability of what they can depict. So fantastical worlds, other dimensions, cosmic travels, all of it. And in the X-Men, it's baked into, and it's quite normal in that universe for these mutants. This is part of their life, part of their world. And understanding that X, in the world of the X-Men, it's the mutant, the mutation, the X mutant gene. But the symbol of the X is a symbol of the Christ. Begins to, and the focus on psychology and the inner world of these mutants, these X-Men, begins to flesh out and create this nebulous feeling, this space that, okay, there's something going on here. And yeah, there's conflicts between mutants and normies. Okay. Even the disciples experience that. How many saints became martyrs? Persecution, even, it's the core story of Jesus's life. It's this constant persecution until eventually he was crucified. So we should not be surprised that symbol becomes a prominent feature, and that certainly everybody in the West who reads the X-Men and sees that cover, or sees when an X is put on Logan's grave in the end of the film Logan, the connections between Christianity, between the Christ, and between these mutants who are persecuted and suffering because they're different, because they're special, because they're extraordinary, because they have powers. Right? We can't lose sight of any of this. It's more than just an allegory for nerds. If we go deeper, begin to go deeper into it, then we start to tease out and feel that, yeah, there's this symbolism, and what's being shown here is it's not a sociological commentary. It's a deeply spiritual commentary that has societal ramifications. It has consequences in the world that we mortal vehicles and vessels have to deal with and suffer. But the foundations for that are in the internal worlds, in the psychological landscape, and in the realm of our true superhero, the real hero inside of us. And that is also explored all the time in the X-Men. How some of the X-Men just want to live normal lives. They just want to be normal. And then Charles Xavier comes along. He finds them using Cerebro, and he invites them to the Xavier School for the gifted, for gifted youth, I think it's called. Xavier School for Gifted Youth. And he wants to encourage them to develop their abilities and harness their abilities and use them for good, and to educate humanity and to show humanity there's nothing to be afraid of. That the mutants are not to be feared, they're to be embraced and trusted, because mutants can do extraordinary things for humanity if they're given an opportunity to do so. That's a very common trope of X-Men wanting to give up their powers, and like especially Logan, that's Wolverine, turning away from the X-Men and going off on his own, and going off to wander the earth, or live in the woods, or this type of thing. And this story arc, this character arc, is explored even in the films, where even Charles Xavier himself, in, I believe it's not X-Men First Class, it's Days of Future Past, where Wolverine goes back in time, and the young Charles Xavier, played by, his name will come to me, he's asked the Beast to give him injections to suppress the mutant X gene and suppress his psychic powers, so that he could be normal, so he could feel normal and not have to deal with all the pain and suffering of all these other people and all these other mutants that he's connected with. Okay, we're behind on a couple of comments, so let's get to them. Benjamin says, I have to get this question out of the way. Where is Thanos on the Tree of Life? Well, Thanos is not in the X-Men universe, but Thanos is the ego. Thanos would be the ego. Thanos would be the lunar astral plane. Like Darth Vader, or like any of the antagonists, any of the villains in any superhero movie. And Thanos uses the Infinity Gauntlet that has the 5 stones that represent 5 different things in that universe, but they're the 4 elements and the 5th element, which is the Akash and the sexual force. So earth, wind, fire, and water, and energy, life force, sex. Well, that's exactly how the egos control us. That's where they get their power. And that 5 also means the 5 senses. That's how egos get to us. We could spend a great deal more time talking about Thanos, but let's continue on. We'll maybe save Thanos for another day. I actually have a talk about Thanos in my book, and I talk about him in one of my blog posts around wokeness, of all things, the SJWs. Because Thanos is a victim, right? He's traumatized, and he's basically projecting his trauma onto the entire universe. Azazel says, but Morgan Freeman is the voice of all our thoughts in daily lives. Okay. Yeah, and he's the voice of God. He plays God in I think a couple movies. Benjamin says, I'm thinking Thanos will be the Keter Sephira, but I might be wrong. Yeah, no, he doesn't run the universe. He destroys the universe. Well, 50% of the universe anyway. Right? And He wants what's fair. He wants what's fair. He wants to restore balance. And what is constantly balancing is mechanical nature. So there's really no way to, there's really no other answer you can get to because of the way his psychology is. He's a wounded child that has amassed tremendous power, that is only, he's become very strong, amassed a tremendous power, and he only wields that power for one purpose and one purpose only, right? To gratify his own sense of victimhood and then project the solution of genocide onto the entire universe. And he holds in his mind that he's right and righteous to do so. So the level of self-righteousness there is, Benjamin says, yeah, okay. His mind blown, he would be the ego because he runs the universe. Yeah, okay, we got that one. And he says, yeah, he would be the Black Lodge, maybe? Well, the Black Lodge is the ego. If you ever hear me say somebody represents the ego, they automatically represent the Black Lodge because the Black Lodge is the ego. They are one and the same. They're one and the same. Let's put it this way. There's no ego outside of the Black Lodge. So every ego is part of the Black Lodge. Okay. Now, I can't really show clips and stuff. You know why? Because of the, we'll get copyright struck and all that stuff. So, but just for your sake, I can pull up some images here. If you remember the film, I spoke about it briefly already. When, oh, for Pete's sake. The internet now it's sometimes the internet just sucks, right? With all these pop-ups and all this stuff like getting in your way, and it's like you're trying to do something quickly and it doesn't let you do it anymore. It's money, 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 money. They always got to funnel you into their little, what they call funnels, right? To get your clicks and your views and all that kind of stuff. In any case, this is one of the I guess what you would call like promotional images. Here's one. Hopefully this will work. Okay. Yeah, see, so that doesn't even work. I described briefly that in this film, it's actually based on one of the comic book story arcs. So it's in the comics as well. I don't know how accurate to the comic books it is, but certain elements are fairly, generally in the same ballpark. So one of them is these things. Yeah. So in the cartoons, they obviously look different. I'm trying to see if I can find one that's big enough to, okay, here. So here, open link in new window. Oh, I don't want the link. I want the image. Open image in new tab. There it is. Okay. So there are these giant robots, and in the film they look like, let's see, they look different ways at different, pointless, different ways in different times. Yeah, I can't even blow that up. Let's see if this makes it any better. That's better. So at the time when they're invented by the Bolivar Trask, they look like this. So in the past, in the time of Nixon, and in the future, they look like this in the middle here. And then I guess in the top one, that's just one of them has been decapitated. But in the cartoon, obviously look very different, but it's a cartoon. So, and in the comics, I think the cartoon is closer to what they look like in the comics as well. Although some of the comics are more sophisticated as well. Because I didn't read the comics, I can't tell you exactly. But suffice it to say, the point, if you remember the story, these Sentinels are essentially robots, but they have this technology that Trask has invented that allows them to detect the mutant gene. So they're able to detect mutants, and they're designed to be like Terminators, to go and essentially just eradicate mutants. And when we begin the film, we're sometime in the future, and these Sentinels have assimilated, because their AI is so brilliant, they're able to reconfigure their matrix, and they are able to absorb the power of any mutant that they kill. So any mutant that they come in contact with and they eliminate, they extract, they can read and understand and extract the information in the mutant X gene of that particular mutant, and they're able to essentially extract that mutant's power and assimilate it into their own, and they can gain the power of that mutant. It's a little far-fetched, but anyway, that's in that universe, that's how that particular thing works with the Sentinels, or at least in the movies. In the movie, it worked that way. It's a significant aspect of the symbology, because obviously, we talk about mechanical nature all the time, and we talk about egos working for mechanical nature. It should not be lost on anyone that in this story arc, what hunts the mutants to extinction, what hunts the X-Men to the brink of extinction, are these AI robots. And the significance of their capability or ability to steal the X-Men's powers. This is so significant to anyone on the spiritual path that it cannot be understated. That symbol, that allegory of these killer mutant robots that are wiping the X-Men off the face of the earth, but in the process of doing that, they're extracting all of those powers for themselves. So these Sentinels, these mechanical monstrosities, are becoming more and more and more powerful. Earlier, Benjamin asked about Thanos being the Black Lodge. What I just described to you in the Sentinels, in Days of Future Past, and how is there a more perfect analogy for the egos, for the Black Lodge? Can you find me one? A more perfect allegory in any mythology, any mythology. I'm open to hearing, feedback or comments. Have you ever heard such a thing in any other sci-fi or fantasy? We see good versus evil, right? This exists, by the way, this archetype, this trope. Yeah, it's okay. So this is an archetype, which means it must exist elsewhere. But in terms of a popular mythology, a popular property, right? The only thing that I can think of, it says Rage of Bahamut. Is that an anime? I don't know what that is. So I've never heard of that. So, but I'm assuming it's an anime. But because it's an archetype, it's going to exist. It most readily exists in chess. Where in chess you can, and there's other games where you can capture your opponent's pieces and then you make them your own. In chess, you get down to the 8th rank with a pawn, and you can promote that pawn to any piece that you want. But usually it's a queen. It doesn't have to be. It can be a rook or a knight or a bishop. But the idea is that if you get to the enemy's territory, then you can, and if they have already taken your queen, then it's like you get to restore the queen. It's not even an ideal perfect analogy, because it's not like in chess you can't take a piece and then use that piece for yourself. But that's exactly what the Sentinels are doing here. They're killing a mutant and then using that mutant's powers for themselves. That is ego. That is the Black Lodge. And when we talked about Hasnamusen, right? Well, eventually you have a dual center of gravity, awakening simultaneously as an angel and a demon. If you do not undertake the work to eradicate the egos from you, eventually they will overpower you. Because if you're not, because there's nothing stays motionless, nothing stays at the same level. So if you're not actively fighting to eliminate them, the law of entropy, the mechanical law of entropy, they're gonna grow like any parasite. They're gonna overtake you like any fungus. They're just naturally gonna grow and overwhelm you. And that's what happens to the mutants in Days of Future Past. Because these Sentinels obviously multiply in number, and they're multiplying in power. And the mutants are dwindling in numbers. So eventually they have to take this radical step of sending Wolverine back in time to eliminate them at their source, when they were still just kind of clumsy, robots. They're not nowhere near as powerful as what they become in the future, but at the beginning they're still vulnerable and still kind of clumsy. But there is another aspect. This is the Sentinel storyline, right? And the Days of Future Past storyline. But these Sentinels represent one of the X-Men's greatest enemies. It's very interesting because it's just like in Doctor Who, the Daleks are like the greatest enemy of the Doctor, or one of the top level adversaries of the Doctor. And again, they're AI robot. Now they're clumsy as hell, but I mean that's mostly has to do with the BBC budgets that they made these things with back in the 60s. and then later in the 70s and so on. But it's interesting how in many sci-fi and superhero stories, and the X-Men is obviously no exception, there's always some kind of a mechanical adversary that they have to face. That's heartless, that's soulless, and the way in which the Sentinels steal the power of the X-Men, at least in the film, is, when I say we can't afford to be naive, and when I say you can't afford to be as so many who are on the spiritual path, they start developing some powers, psychic powers, or the ability for insight or foresight or animal communication or whatever it is, the first thing that happens is your ego wants to A, take credit for them, and B, take control of those powers and use those powers for who? For oneself, for itself, the false self. But the X-Men, our inner X-Men, the inner superhero, is who that power belongs to. It's our higher self, from whence we gain that power, that strength. But the Sentinels are always standing on guard. They're always waiting for their opportunity to strike, to ambush the X-Men and steal their power. That's exactly what the ego does. Ego can be very patient at times. Yeah, so when it comes to Rage of Bahamut, Azazel says, haha, yeah, it says it's, wouldn't say it's very popular. And he says, it's an Onyx task force that hunts the X-Men of the City of Mutants. But it's an Onyx task force that hunts the X-Men of the City of Mutants. I'm not sure what you're referring to there. So, and only if that man is blessed by El, it is impossible to triumph. Without such blessing, I mean. These last three comments are a little cryptic. So I don't know, and only if that man, who man is blessed by El, it isn't. Yeah. So anyway, so maybe if you want to flesh some of that out, because it's a little. These comments are a little cryptic, Azazel. And you mentioned Onyx Task Force again. Being that I didn't read the comics or watch the cartoon, I'm really only mostly only familiar with the films. Oh, I see. You were talking about the anime. Okay, so anyway, so I'll have to look into that. Then I'll probably understand the rest of the comments then. Now, there's another aspect of the X-Men, and this relates to the fact that the mutants are divided into two camps. You have, I don't have to look this up like this. You have Charles Xavier and the Xavier's School for Gifted Youth, and the X-Men proper that he has around him, that he is convinced that they should work for the betterment of humanity. These are the good-natured X-Men, the good-natured mutants that want to help humanity, and they don't want to have conflict necessarily, and they're more altruistic in their nature. Let's see if I can find one that open image in U tab. Okay. But by no means is this philosophy or view shared by all of the mutants. On the other side, you have Magneto. And here we see Magneto from the comic books, and probably fairly close to the cartoon as well. And also the two actors who played Magneto in the films. We have Ian McKellen, who on the right, who played Magneto in the older Magneto. And then we have oh gosh, I'm so bad with the name. So I've got a cheat sheet here. So it's Michael Fassbender. And by the way, James McAvoy played the younger Charles Xavier. But so Michael Fassbender plays the young Magneto, and Ian McKellen plays old Magneto. And Magneto suffers from two things: a superiority complex, but also, for lack of a better word, he's traumatized. He has been on the receiving end of humanity's prejudice, bigotry, and outright cruelty for far too long. His backstory is that he's essentially born in a concentration camp. He sees his parents brutally murdered, and because the Nazis discover that he's a mutant, they conduct all of these experiments on him, and they try to turn him into a weapon for them, basically. But in the process, they essentially create a monster. They create him as a villain. They make a villain out of him. He becomes what he beheld in his captives and in his trauma. And he attracts like-minded, like-spirited mutants who have had enough of humanity, and they've had enough of taking the abuse from these clearly inferior Homo sapiens. Now, the interesting dichotomy here, that you have these two individuals, Charles Xavier and Magneto, and it is a it really is an interesting dynamic, because Charles and Magneto are friends. They are friends. They both believe and want what's best for mutant kind. They both fight for a future when mutants can at last find peace. But how they go about it, their philosophy at times is completely antithetical. Because one believes that you can attain that utopia or future nirvana or whatever you want to call it through peaceful means. The other one, Magneto, says, no, you have to use violence. You have to put these muggles in their place. You know that I've been working on completing this presentation about Human 3.0. And there is a group in the world that consists of extraordinary people with extraordinary abilities, and at the very least, extraordinary power, influence, and resources. We call them the elite cabal, if you will. And this elite clandestine group, which is actually made up of many factions, many groups, they're not necessarily all united under a single banner. There's many different I wouldn't know if I call them tribes, but they are their own sorts of groups. And some of them have honest to goodness powers. Some of them have ascended to great heights because they have made use of their powers in order to amass great wealth, power, influence. These are the equivalent of Magneto and his mutants. Because the global elite justify their suppression of freedoms and their attempts to control humanity. They justify it on the basis of the human condition and human nature. They see our unruliness as necessitating us being herded around like a shepherd overseeing unruly sheep. And in very real terms, this global elite class has a terrible superiority complex. Now, it's very unlikely that many of them are traumatized as such, but they all suffer from fear. Just as Magneto suffers from fear, a fear that was bred into him, born and bred into him in the concentration camps, and reinforced all the times he had to fight for his survival and the survival of his mutant brethren from the prejudices, the bigotry, and the violence of the rest of humanity, the normies. Well, the elite class, they live in a perpetual state of fear because they have everything to lose. And like many times throughout history, right, when the barbarians are at the gate, right, and when they're storming the Bastille and they're preparing the guillotines, right, it's always the elite, it's always the aristocracy who lose their heads, end up losing their heads and losing their fortunes and everything else in the process, right? And so they're terrified of that. And as I've explained many, many times on this program, the desire to control, the need, the deep need, urge, uncontrollable urge to control and be in control and to control that which doesn't want to be controlled, but you want to control them anyway. That's 100% fear. When I say that the X-Men may be the perfect allegory for today, because you have to ask yourself, who, if the global elite class represents Magneto and all of his mutants, where are the X-Men? Where's Charles Xavier? Where is the Xavier School for the Gifted Youth, for gifted youngsters? I actually, I think that's the correct name for his school, I believe. It's Xavier School for gifted youngsters. Yeah, it's right here. There it is. Okay. So where is Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters? Where is where is Cerebro? Where are the X-Men? We have the elite ruling class. They have powers. They have abilities. Not all of them. Not all of them are extraordinary. I personally don't believe someone like Jeff Bezos is particularly extraordinary. But Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, and maybe not so much Bill Gates, but there are people in those ranks. And you can tell, like Elon Musk with his, and Mark Zuckerberg, you can tell they have their social difficulties. I think Elon Musk said he's dyslexic, or is it dyslexic or Asperger's? Bill Gates has Asperger's as well. Now, why is that important? Because many people who work with autistic children and people on the autism spectrum will attest to this, that many autistic children are savants. So they can do incredible mathematics, or they have incredible memories, or they're incredible musicians. So they're autistic savants. Very, very often, souls incarnating, reincarnating, or just incarnating, who have achieved fairly high levels of being, but they still have quite a bit of ego to eliminate, they will come and they will face challenges that are commensurate with their level of being. And remember, those challenges are internal challenges. They're in the internal worlds, and specifically the infernal worlds. And if we only have a few more lifetimes, possibly, and this humanity is running out of time and opportunities to eliminate those egos, while you have more people showing up with autism, being born with it, or being born with various different maladies, and in order to suffer and pay that debt, that karmic debt. But at the same time, if they're autistic savants, you know that they have these heightened powers, these heightened abilities. And so in the case of Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, you have individuals who have these heightened abilities, heightened intellect. Like you don't achieve at certain levels by being an imbecile. Now, in the corporate ranks, you can be fairly mundane, just be really charismatic and know how to play the politics game, and you can ascend the power level. You can do this in politics. Politics is filled with normies, mundane, completely average, if not below average individuals who are just really, really, really good at schmoozing. And they're really, really good at playing the politics game and the popularity contest game ever since high school. So in high school, these are the people that couldn't get good grades. They were not extraordinary really in any way. Maybe they were good at sports, but eventually you get to an age where it doesn't matter how good at sports you were, you can't make a career out of that anymore. Not everybody. It's a very, very, very minuscule percentage of the population that can make a career out of their high school football or whatever. So, but if you're really good socially, if you're really good at being popular, well, you've got a fantastic future being a completely boring, normal, unremarkable individual with no real special abilities or skills or anything of any value to offer anyone other than the ability to fit into a square box somewhere, to be an ass in a seat in the legislature, in the Congress, in the Senate, or the House of Commons, or whatever the legislature is in the country that you are, or the jurisdiction that you're in. Is it municipal? Is it state? Is it federal? You can be a bum in a seat and you can raise your hand and you can take money from lobbyists, and you can allow their corporate overlords, the multinational corporations, to write the legislation that you then introduce in the House, because that's how the game works. But you go to the Washington parties, or you go to the whatever, right? And you can hobnob and you can be a diplomat and you can be all these things if your only one real ability is that you have people skills, and you can, you know how to grease people's palms and stroke people's egos, and right, and you know how to play that game. The world is filled with completely unremarkable, mundane, average people that have risen to ranks of positions of power and influence simply because of this ability that they had. But that's not necessarily the people that we're talking about here. We're talking about those people that are like, in their own way, they're like mutants. They're like X-Men. They have some kind of extraordinary gift or proclivity or ability, and it's a reflection of a heightened consciousness. Now, whether that consciousness gets applied intellectually, artistically, musically, in philosophy, in some other way, but that ability to know and sometimes There are people with heightened esoteric abilities or potentials who are also masterful at psychological manipulation, because that's ultimately what black magic is. That's the core of black magic. And we can think of examples. We can cite some examples here. And this is, I don't want to mention it because of the platform that we're on, because it's, you can get into trouble, right? But that individual, right? A master of psychological manipulation. But you see, the CEO or the politician, generally speaking, is really a backroom kind of deal maker. He's really, he's like a con artist. He's like a card shark or a con artist or a salesman. It's one-on-one, right? He can talk you into anything or talk you out of anything. But it takes a special someone with special abilities to manipulate on this kind of level. And have the impact on that kind of scale. Now, interestingly enough, this fellow, he himself doesn't have that ability, does he? He doesn't have that charisma, right? I mean, the joke is that the memes are that he's like Data from Star Trek, right? That he's like an android. He's like emotionless and, but look at the power of his platform. Look at what he designed and how he designed it. And the designers of that platform admit that they designed it to give you the dopamine hit that makes you keep wanting to check your updates and keep wanting to check to see how people are responding to your posts. They designed it to be addictive. They designed it to be manipulative. And people have been looking at, and now look at how many people's lives social media has destroyed, mostly young girls, teenage girls and young girls. The unintended consequences, perhaps, of a platform which at its roots is completely mechanical but addictive. It's attuned to the ego, which is what this fellow is manipulating. But they're manipulating it on a level that goes beyond what a politician or a salesman or the typical con artist does. They're at a different level, in other words, right? They're at a different level. And we don't want to be naive, and we don't want to take away from this group the fact that there are individuals with abilities and powers, and they're using them in the same way, in the same kind of philosophy that Magneto does. And Benjamin asked earlier about Thanos. Now, Thanos has a genocidal side to him, right? Thanos wants to wipe out 50% of the universe. Well, we can think of another fellow whose father was an anti-humanist, and in the past he has mentioned that, due to this anti-humanist philosophy, which is basically, Magneto has an anti-humanist philosophy. Magneto has a pro-mutant philosophy. And so do many of these folks. They have a anti-humanist approach to what they do and how they go about doing it. And then there's the organizations, right? And then we can there's the organizations. I got an idea. Why don't I pull this over here? So there's BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. There's the World Economic Forum, George Soros, Klaus Schwab. It goes on and on. The list goes on and on and on. And whether it's mass mind control or control of the populace through digital IDs and digital currencies, BlackRock is famous for coercing companies by withholding funding unless they submit to their ESG and DEI mandates. And this is BlackRock's CEO is it David? Is it Fink? Fink? I think it's Fink. Regardless, you get the picture. There are extraordinary individuals with extraordinary power, whether that's truly innate, conscious, human 3.0, approaching human 3.0 type characteristics and attributes and abilities, or if it's just the fact that they have tremendous worldly power. They have money, they have connections, they have resources, human resources, financial resources, economic resources, natural resources. They have land, they have titles, right? Connections, networks. In other words, they've amassed all this worldly power and influence, and they're using it in anti-humanist ways, just like Magneto. So, where are the X-Men? Who are the X-Men? Where's Charles Xavier and his team to counteract, but more importantly, to have the wisdom of Charles Xavier to know that as we face our extinction, as we face the Sentinels, our greatest foe, these mechanical monstrosities that want to steal our power from mechanical nature and eliminate us and eradicate us. We become our own worst enemy unless we can unite. That's what Charles Xavier has Wolverine do, go back in time, and he's got to recruit both young Charles Xavier and young Magneto, played by James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender. Because we cannot defeat the Sentinels. We cannot defeat this mechanical monstrosity. Divided, because we are divided and conquered as a humanity. And make no mistake, many of these individuals at these high levels, they really do believe that they're doing what's best for the planet and they're doing what's best for humanity. Many of them really do believe that. You can say they're delusional if you want, but they have good rationalizations and valid reasons that they've accumulated from their own experience, just like Magneto has his reasons for why he does what he does. And the global elite class have their reasons for why they do what they do. But what Magneto doesn't understand, what the elite class around the world doesn't realize, perhaps, is that they're being played for idiots. They're being played for fools. That mechanical nature, the Black Lodge, has turned them into useful idiots and vacuous pawns. This is a level of sophistication and subtlety that sadly isn't reflected in the X-Men movies. It may be reflected more in the X-Men comics, but I'm not going to personally go through thousands of issues of X-Men comics to try to dig up to see if it ever got to that level of nuance. But the reality is that the Sentinels are secretly controlling those X-Men already, because that's mechanical nature. That's fear, the desire to control. They're being controlled. You see, a cog in a machine doesn't get to choose. No cog in a machine gets to choose what it does. It only gets greased. And I say that, pun intended, right? Because the X-Men, the mutants, are getting greased at the hands of the Sentinels, at the hands of the machines. So all the global elite, with all their money and their power and their influence and everything, they think that they're the masters of the universe. But no, they're the masters of nothing. They are being mastered. They're just puppets. They're puppets of their own fear. Who is going to tell them that? Who is going to reach them? And who is going to play the role of Charles Xavier to explain to them, no, you don't understand. The real threat is this mechanicity, or these machines, these Sentinels. And they're stealing our power. They're stealing your power and your influence and your resources. To do what? To divide and conquer us, and to steal our power, and to eliminate humanity. Because that's their job. And especially eliminate the X-Men. Especially eliminate any chance, any hope of Human 3.0. It wants Human 2.0s. Why? Because they're easier to control. As unruly as they are, they're easier to control and manipulate, and you can divide and conquer them, and they're constantly killing each other, and that's good for mechanical nature. That's what mechanical nature wants. And what mechanical nature needs at the end of a humanity is very divided and conquered, polarized, binary tribal groups, all giving themselves back to nature, turning back to paganism, nature worship, and doing their permaculture and smoking their weed and doing their psychedelics and getting into their shamanism and everything else, as they deify Gaia, and they get into the paganism of nature worship, and they turn to survivalists, the most base primal survivalist motivations. So they're digging bunkers and filling it with 50,000 cans of Campbell soup and 5 million rounds of ammunition, right? And 5,000 gallons of petrol. This is what mechanical nature wants. To weaken humanity and turn humanity back into animals. So that's the symbolism of the Sentinels wiping the mutants off the face of the earth. But sooner or later, this must be made clear to the elite ruling class, the other individuals who have potential for extraordinary insight, have potential for have higher consciousness, higher a different kind of intellect that is more conscious and and other abilities, and plus their worldly resources and their worldly power and abilities and so on and so forth, must be brought to bear on the real enemy. So that's why I guess it's the one of the X-Men movies is called X-Men United. I think it's don't remember which. Yeah, there's one called The Last Stand. There's another one called X-Men Apocalypse, Days of Future Past. But I think it's X2. I think it's the second movie. It's called X-Men United. So it's a common theme where Charles Xavier makes peace with Magneto and explains to him and convinces him that we have to work together against the common cause. So it's this role that Atlas Conscious Arts is proposing to undertake. To be able to establish something akin to Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. I call them maybe Atlas centers with high order rainforest ecosystems indoors that will attract those individuals who are drawn to our message of Human 3.0 and where they come from. They will come from all different ranks, including the elite class. We have to be able to attract individuals from that elite class as well. Just as Charles Xavier himself comes from a wealthy family. In fact, it's his family fortune that he uses in order to be able to, set up the X-Men and do what they do. I, unfortunately, don't have any kind of family fortune like that. So I have no other choice but to turn to crowdfunding and then later use that crowdfunding as the springboard, as the foundation to go out and reach individuals who have more resources, financial and human and otherwise, to be able to bring into the fold and undertake this enterprise of this really is like the X-Men. The difference is we have the ability to reach more and more individuals that have the potential to become X-Men. Whereas in the comic books, it's mostly just Xavier looking for people who already are X-Men, but they just don't know it, or they're hiding, or they're afraid, or so on, right? We're getting a little behind on our comments here, so let's back up. And Benjamin says, kind of like Enoch and Lucifer in the video game Ascension of the Shaddai. Lucifer, or maybe it's not Lucifer, maybe Lucifer helps Enoch through his journey through the game. I've never played that game, but I'll take your word for it. He says it's on Nintendo Switch now. He says it looks great. And he also says you should check out the documentary Divided Brain. It touches on the disregard of true real world education. Okay. I will see if I can find it. Benjamin says, these anti-humanists or Satanists are doing these things on an accelerated level because they know their appointed time is short. Soon, Satan and his angels would be confined to the bottomless pit, and then to the lake of fire. So he will try to do as much damage as possible in the brief time they have left. And he says, this is what the scripture said. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. And Benjamin continues, he says, I believe those who are referred to as those who dwell in the heavens are people with higher or elevated consciousness, or inside the ark. So the battle for the souls of humanity is not over. It's being waged. It's really only just it's been going on for millennia, of course. But the final battle, the final war for the souls of humanity is just ramping up. There are, make no mistake, there are many who have sold their soul and are like consciously Satanists. But again, even that is, we have to understand that they were seduced into that role. Even demons can be redeemed. Even demons can be redeemed if they change their ways. My interest is not in trying to turn Luciferians or Satanists or awakened demons or black magicians over to our cause, because it's very unlikely that's going to happen. But there are many who are on the edge and they have these abilities, and unfortunately they have been using them. They've been cultivating them and using them in the wrong way. So an example of this is there are many, 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 many people who are manifesting their desires. And they're doing magic. They're using visualization to get what they want. And there are these extraordinary speakers, motivational speakers, and these gurus, self-help gurus, and so on, that are encouraging them to do so. Now, among their ranks will include individuals at the highest echelon, millionaires, billionaires, and let's face it, a lot of these individuals, they meditate, they do yoga, they do all sorts of activities because they're trying to live their best life, and they don't want to suffer as badly as they do psychologically, so they try everything under the sun. There's all sorts of high-tech, expensive, new age therapies as well, like very expensive sound therapies, and then there's those deprivation chambers, sensory deprivation chambers. They're like these pods that you go and you fill it with salt water or something, and then you float in this insulated pod that shuts out all light and all sound, and you're just sitting there floating in the water. And look, it goes on and on and on and on and on like this, right? There's these things are expensive, right? There's a lot, and then they go on these like eco village excursions. I think I talked to you about these in the past. These are like luxury eco resorts where they go and they rough it for a week or 2 weeks in the jungle somewhere, or in this completely isolated thing, away from civilization, away from the noise, and away from the cell towers, and away from everything, right? but it's like, $2,000, $3,000 a night or whatever. But they're having, 4-course meals, Michelin star quality stuff, and like $1,000 a bottles of wine, and and so on. Like, so they do these things, but they do it in their own way, in this certain like materialistic, hyper luxury way, because they have the money to spend. And as long as there are people with money to spend, there will be people making products and services for them to spend their money. So in that class, there are going to be lots and lots of individuals they're not full-blown Luciferian Satanist black magicians, or you know what I mean. They're just been misguided. They're just naive, really. They're naive. They've been misled, and they become useful idiots of the Black Lodge that is now harnessing and taking advantage and using their powers, using their abilities, using everything they have to offer this world is getting directed a certain way by the big machine, right? They've just become a cog in the machine, and they're just in the process of getting greased. They don't really have a choice in the matter. We can give them that choice. We can show them, and we can give them access again to where the source of their true freedom lies. And we can give them a new vision, a new mission, one that deep down, many of them long for with all of their heart and all of their soul. And and even those that just want legacy and comfort and security and freedom and safety from the end of the world. We're ark builders. What more do you want? What more could you ask for? This is another archetype, another common trope in many, many different mythologies and stories, where adversaries have to come together and overcome their differences in order to face a mutual threat. And now is no different. And Atlas Conscious Arts was made for this. And our upcoming campaign, a 10 for Human 3.0, is to give us some wherewithal, 12 to 18 months of all our expenses, marketing, communication, travel. And so I can hire some people, so people can quit their jobs and dedicate themselves full time to this vision and this mission. Got to give us 18 months to be able to win some major clients and or some partners, like an Elon Musk, for example. Not necessarily Elon Musk, but someone like him, to see what we're doing and say, okay, I'm in. And yeah, okay, you guys, what do you if I can do 12 months, 18 months with $250,000, well, then I don't need a billionaire or a millionaire to give us $50 million to do what we're doing, right? It's just, we just have to build on that. You can't make money without spending it, and you can't devote yourself and dedicate yourself full time to a mission and a vision without having something to live on. So I can't expect people to leave their careers, leave their jobs, and come and devote themselves to this cause when they're already working at times 18-hour days, right? And 80-hour weeks. Like there's no room for them to try to do this part-time. They don't have any energy, and it's unfair to ask people to do that. This is a serious mission. It's serious work. And it requires serious people, and they are in need of serious support. And this is a very serious campaign. And it is no less serious than what the symbols and allegories that we've been talking about here today have been pointing to. We are at an existential crossroads for humanity. Crossroads. Remember I said there's no limit to the significance of the symbol, the X. Like when you come to a crosswalk or a railway crossing, or you come to a crossroads and you must make a decision. Are we going to go this way or that way? And as I showed you before in this presentation, right? The X, it is the ark. It's the Ark of Noah atop Mount Ararat. And it's the Holy Grail. And it's the Ark of the Covenant. When you add the arch to the X, and you make the rune Attlas, which is the Alpha and the Omega. And I walked you through all of this in the video that I showed you, and I will be premiering the updated videos soon. I wanted to be able to have part 3 ready for today, but it just was not possible, and for various different reasons, but mostly because the third part is it's a crucial element and can't be rushed, right? So taking and plus, in reference to what I talked about last week or the week before, and not overdoing it and not burning myself out, I've been taking it easy. I haven't been killing myself in order to try to get it done by Sunday, because I might have been able to push myself really hard to get it done for today, but what good would that have done if it would have burnt myself out in the process? And now for the next week, I would fall into depression and not be able to do any work. So I really, really had to be careful to avoid that, getting caught on that swinging pendulum, right? So the middle way, not at the extremities, but the middle way. And but everything is progressing well. So I'll have updates for you guys on that soon. I'm going to be quiet now for just a minute while I just get to a couple of these comments. Benjamin says, to follow up on the other Benjamin's comment, I saw a video on YouTube that in the Vatican, demons appear to priests. They say they show up crying because they know they have a short time. And Benjamin says, esoterically, X is associated with transformation, as it symbolizes a crucial turning point. The ancient Greeks used the letter chi, X, which became a powerful symbol in Christianity for Christ and transformation through resurrection. In alchemy, X was used to signify transmutation, often representing the fusion of different elements to create something new. This is all encoded when, we talk about, right, the union of masculine and feminine. And so the feminine is the V, right? Or known as the chalice, and then the chevron, or the A, is the blade, right? And so the coming together of those, obviously, is exactly that alchemical and transforming dynamic that you're describing there. So, but it's also trying to, when you, yeah, you know what? Can I show, is it this one? Yeah, I have this slide. I have this slide on here. If I can just, yeah, okay. Do you remember when I showed you the slide on the different dimensions? You see, these are basically, they're rune Attlas for sure, but every Attlas rune has the X in it. And what you will notice is, I'm just going to highlight them. You see these 4 0 points? 0 point, 0 point, 0 point, 0 point. The gateway to a higher dimension is you must pass through the 0 point. And we know that from, for example, and likewise, going in the other direction, to go from a higher dimension to a lower dimension, you pass through the 0 point. In other words, you have to go through the X. And we know that, like last week when I showed you the camera obscura, or the camera lens, right? The camera lens is looking at reality, but then everything comes through the lens and it passes through a focal point, a 0 point, and it creates a 2D projection, which is inverted, and it has lost a dimension. When you take a photo, you lose a dimension. You go from 3D to 2D. And it works the same way the other way when you're going through the 0 point and you into higher dimensions. It's so the transformation, the transmutation, and also the traversal from lower dimensions to higher dimensions, it's another way of comprehending, or another example of Jacob's ladder and the nature of Jacob's ladder. Because when you look at this in 3 dimensions, it's a spiral staircase. It's like DNA with the 2 double spiral helix going down, and that central connection, that central pillar, is a 0 point that the staircase spirals around. That's DNA, which I have in also in this presentation. When you take the, let's just back up here. Oh, I can't do it. Wait, hang on a second. Slideshow, monitor, primary monitor, and use timings. Okay, here. So just very quickly. So you have, in the rune Attlas, you have the central pillar, the spinal column, or the 0 dimension. In other words, the dimension of zero dimensions. It's the central pillar on the tree of life that I'll show you in a minute. And then about it, you have Ida and Pingala, you have the serpents, you have the zigzags on the sides, right? Those are the X's and the diamonds of the Attlas rune. And when you compress that, you get the DNA, like, right? It's just the same symbol, but you just, right? You push it in and then you, why is it now going backwards? Okay, there. And when you look at this on the tree of life, and I know I have a tree of life here somewhere. Yeah, okay. So, right, this is the central pillar. And around it are Attlas, the X's. You have to pass through the fourth dimension to get to the fifth. And you have to pass through the sixth dimension, the causal body, willpower, to get to the consciousness and the innermost. And then again, you pass through Da'at, which is Gnosis, in order to reach the seventh dimension of Absolute and Christ consciousness. So as Benjamin was saying, like the Kai Rho, that's why I mentioned in the presentation how Emperor Constantine was shown the Kai Rho in divine revelation in order to unite all of the Roman Empire. This is the Pax Romana, right? That's the Rho on the X, or the P and the X. And I showed you all the relationship between all of these symbols. But they all relate to the actual metaphysical science of, you want to talk about alchemy. Whoops. This is alchemy. And the Alm of Life. Directing the creative force toward the art of being, and then receiving down from the ability to become a triune human being on earth as it is in heaven. This is the alchemical process. And at its heart is this transformative power of the X-Man, the human 3.0. Because we begin as a human 2.0 in mechanical nature, disconnected from Attlas, from Alpha and Omega. But we can receive the lightning, the insight, the power, the strength, and the information, the knowledge, to be transformed alchemically and be an earth in microcosm, but as it is in heaven. So I agree wholeheartedly, Benjamin, in what you were saying in that comment, right? I just have to deal with the reality that no one is going to take my word as gospel. just as you stating all of this is wonderful. It's fine. But why? Why is it? How is it? Why is it? How is it? I don't have the luxury of just rhyming off. This is what the alchemist said, and this is what Christianity says, and this is what this said, and that said, and blah 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 blah. No, I have to. I'm dealing with a humanity here. I have to give them new forms, new expressions, right? I have to break it down and show them why, show them how it is. What is alchemy in a way that somebody can understand? Like transmuting the lead of ego into the gold of the human soul. Okay, fine. But what does that look like? What does that entail from a metaphysical scientific point of view? So I'm not in any way, shape, or form, right, taking anything away from you sharing in your comment. You're absolutely right. But I have to talk about it in a new way and in a different way. Because if I try to speak to scientists talking about alchemy and transmuting lead into the lead of the ego into the gold of the human soul and leave it at that, I'm not going to get very far with them. I have to play the role of Charles Xavier here. And if Charles Xavier is going to win over Magneto, he's going to need more than just repeating what others have said, or what 1,000-year-old or 2,000-year-old or 10,000-year-old traditions said. Because you know what? We've had thousands of years and a good 200 years of esotericism where that hasn't caught on yet. And many, 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 many people misunderstand, and many, many, many people misconstrue, and many, many people just dismiss as empty belief and superstition the metaphysical science of reality. Someone has to be able to bring it back into the fold. And yeah, talking about mythology and scripture and everything is, the Bhagavad Gita and all that, that's wonderful. Those scriptures have been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. What about our modern mythologies? What about the things that people have actually seen and have actually read and can actually understand and relate to potentially? That were never designed to be scripture or religion. That's the beauty of turning to these modern myths. That's the beauty of turning to X-Men, for instance. Because the people who made this film weren't trying to convert anybody. Then they weren't trying to collect donations. And they don't have a pope or a priesthood or churches, well, unless you want to call cinemas churches. But you know what I mean? It's hard for somebody to come along and say, no, that X-Men movie was just designed to brainwash people. No, it's entertainment. It was entertainment. It wasn't trying to do anything. But in the not trying to do anything, the creators were touched and moved and inspired, and they did things a certain way. Like the people who made the comics, who came up with the comics in the first place, who were inspired by that symbol for the very same reasons that the alchemists and Christianity and people in the past were inspired by that symbol, and the power that they knew was latent and present, ever present, and radiating from that symbol, if only we have the eyes to see and the ears to hear it. If only we can be conscious of it. We can know it. This is what the one who comes at last is here to do. To perhaps look where is the last place people think you're going to find esoteric truth and powerful symbols of transformative knowledge and wisdom. But that's the book of Thoth. That's the book that Hermes Trismegistus taught from. The book that is not written anywhere. It is written everywhere. To add to Benjamin Ochoa's comments, it is similar to when Jesus casts out the demons. They say the same thing, that their time is not up yet. Demons are aware that their time is short. That's true because, well, that is true because we're on a switchover. But in the meantime, their work is to help bring about the demise of humanity. Right? Like the Sentinels, they're here to wipe out the mutants, but again, it's human 3.0, or people on the path to human 3.0, the people with the potential for 3.0 that mechanical nature wants to wipe out. And the cities and so on and so forth. I mean, like, but it wants people to be animalistic. So it's very anti-humanist, right? Because a human being is not an animal. Eric Shipley says, I just painted a symbol from a vision that looks very similar to that. I'm assuming when you say similar to that, you mean similar to this? Or similar to this? Anyway, similar to or similar to this. Anyway, what doesn't matter. They're all related, right? This is Attlas, which is also the Alpha and the Omega. Eric, your name is it feels like it could be new. Yeah. So okay. So did you? If you haven't been around to watch this presentation, right? This symbol on its side is the fish. That was the early Christian symbol, right? Because Jesus is the avatar of Pisces, and it is the it is the alpha, right? That fish is the alpha. And then in this orientation, it's omega, which is also Attlas, and both omega and Attlas are the last letters in their respective alphabets. Omega in Greek and Attlas in the Futhark, the Nordic alphabet. So it's alpha and it's omega. It's the fish, right? I'll teach you to be fishers of men. And as you know, as I've shown, it's the Chi Rho, or the Pax Romana. It's also, interestingly enough, it's also our Bluetooth connection. So what helps different technologies connect with one another, turns out helps us connect to the Trinity, the Holy Spirit, Christ, and God, and one another. And that is the Chi Rho, the Pax Romana, that Constantine used to convert all of the Roman Empire and create not just a Roman Catholic Europe, but a Christian world, and give us an XP boost to the Dark Ages. So the birth and death, the resurrective power of that symbol, like the phoenix, like the Ark of the Ark of the Covenant, and like, of course, the cross, the Christ. That's the resurrecting power of the Christ, because that is also like an XP, meaning experience, right? XP boost. And led to the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the modern age. Not just in Europe, but not just a Catholic Europe, but a Christian world. All of that in the power of that symbol that we've been looking at here. That's the foundation of, right, Atlas Conscious Arts. Because, yeah, here. So we become who art in heaven. That's Atlas Conscious Arts. That's where we get our logo from. You start putting it all together. Because that, let me get my pad here for a second. This, you can see, oops. That's just like the Alpha and the Omega. And it's also the globe that Atlas is holding up. It's just Otala, which happens to be the name that I was born with, because my name is Attila, which comes from Otala. It's all connected. I was born for this. This is my life's work. I've been doing nothing for the past, essentially, certainly the past 15 years, but pursuing this. And before that, I was just being prepared to be able to pursue it. And this is where we're at. A 10 for Human 3.0, this crowdfunding campaign. But the power of that symbol can't be understated. So if you painted it, then surely there's significance in it for you. But I can tell you what the significance of the symbol is, why it showed up for you, and why you ended up painting it. That's for you to discern for yourself through meditation and through any other means that that is available to you. But many people have many schools. I'm not that interested in the school part of it, but the center part of it, yes. And it's really just about empowering others, right? Because help you and others unlock those higher dimensions inside of yourself and unlock access to your innermost being and the seventh dimension, so you can achieve what people call downloads, right? People call when you in meditation or inspiration or undertaking this process in the Alm of Life, the analogous ultimate methodology, and the alchemical process, and directing our creative forces up in Adam, up and in order to receive. You see, there are many, 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 many people who have this potential, who have this capability. But what have they been doing? That energy has not been flowing up in Adam, but down and out. They've been manifesting their desires. Their powers have been stolen by sentinels. Their mechanical self, their mechanical egos have been stealing their power and siphoning off. And so imagine how many, not hundreds, not thousands, not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the world who right now, as we speak, are using their consciousness and squandering their creative energy on all sorts of superfluous, materialistic, fear-based, on fame, on followers, on fortune, on material things, on... Imagine if they could be shown how to direct that energy and harness it for the sake of their innermost being, their innermost essence of God, their innermost intimate Christ, and use it as Theodore. Theodore means gift of God, like Theodore Tugboat, because the supertanker can't come into port without the help of a tugboat. You need the supertanker to go across the ocean. A tugboat does not belong on the ocean. A tugboat cannot cross the Atlantic. It just can't. But the super cargo ship that does cross the Atlantic, it can't maneuver in port. It needs a tugboat. And actually, more often than not, several tugboats, in order to bring its gifts from afar, from far off lands and far off shores, that precious cargo needs Theodore, a gift of God. Just imagine if a fraction of those millions of people out there right now squandering their gifts instead harness them to bring God's gifts into the world. Imagine the transformative effect. Science will progress more in a decade than it has in the previous 1,000 centuries. Thousands of years. Forget hundreds of years. Because the metaphysical science will break us free from the shackles of the illusion of mechanicity and empiricism and physicality, the glass ceiling that we are trapped under. And I've walked all this through, and in the videos that I'm going to re-release are going to again walk through all of this in detail. So in some detail anyway, in enough detail, I hope, to win people's support in saying, you know what, I can give a 10 for this cause, right? I can chuck in my 10. And if there's a chance that, in this X-Men analogy, that we really do have these latent capabilities, these latent abilities, and we're squandering it all, and we're losing out to mechanicity, and we're all getting wiped out, and all these powers are being stolen from us. And if that allegory really is on the nose, then this guy is right. And this guy, who essentially is equating himself to two X-Men. Atlas is Charles Xavier, and Attila is Wolverine, because that's the physical body. That's the physical. He does the grunt work, the dirty work. He does He does Charles Xavier's. He's the one that Charles Xavier sends back in time, right? It's Wolverine. It says Wolverine is the one who's like the dull instrument, right? Charles Xavier is in a wheelchair, so he needs that physical expression. And yeah, Wolverine's got claws. It's like good cop, bad cop. It's like mercy and severity. It's It's very interesting. Now, Benjamin says the tugboat is between heaven and heaven on earth. It brings the gifts, intuition. As Einstein said, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. Yes, correct. So the intuitive mind is the ship. The intuitive mind is the ship. The tugboat is the rational mind. So the tugboat very much is on this side. It's part of the brain, and it belongs to the vessel, the vehicle, the mortal self, right? It's associated with that rational mind. But the intuition is associated with the being. That's the ship that comes from heaven to bring its gifts. And the rational mind must obey and must serve the ship. No, it was close enough. It was close enough. It's close enough. There is one other character that we haven't talked about yet. Mentioned it very, very briefly in our presentation here when we were talking about Cairo or the Pax Romana, and that's the Phoenix. The Phoenix is a supremely powerful and mysterious entity that that plays a pinnacle role in the X-Men series. Now, there it is. Okay. I knew I had a picture of the Phoenix here. So there's the Phoenix and Jean Grey. Oh, it's kind of small, isn't it? Here, what if that doesn't help. Okay. So there's the Phoenix and Jean Grey. So if you remember in the movie, the Phoenix sort of comes out of Jean Grey every now and then, and it sort of has a mind of its own. This is, in no uncertain terms, an amalgamation of the Divine Mother, Devi Kundalini Shakti, and the Christ, and the Holy Spirit, because the Phoenix, as a bird, relates to the dove, but as Quetzalcoatl relates to the Christ, and as Jean Grey being feminine and a woman, it's the Divine Mother. So it's this amalgamation, it's this amalgam. And it's really hard to get into the nuts and bolts without studying the comics and reading the comics and knowing all the different things that the Phoenix does in the comics over the 40 years, or more than that, 50 years, 60 years that X-Men have been around. But suffice it to say, this is another extraordinary phenomena taking place in this comic book universe of the X-Men. That not only do we have the symbol of the Christ in the very title and embodied in the very nature of the heroes and the antagonists and everything, but we have this visceral, powerful, magical, mystical, mysterious, but supremely intelligent, supremely powerful cosmic being that has a physical, mortal incarnation, mortal embodiment, and that mortal happens to be a woman. But it's a very powerful aspect and a very meaningful symbol that the Christ is depicted in this way, because the death and resurrection, but the phoenix as a symbol for that, who dies in his own flames and is born from the ashes. This is alchemy in a single symbol. It's alchemy in a symbol, but it's also the act of Christification, the process of Christification, of death and resurrection. And the fact that it's associated with a female superhero, it's really key, is really important, because it's indicating the divine feminine relationship, and the key to Christification is through working with the Divine Mother. But Jean Grey's powers are most similar to those of Charles Xavier's. She's a psychic, very powerful psychic, and psychokinetic, and so on, right? So Charles Xavier, it's like the embodiment as the leader and the sort of father figure of the X-Men. He's related to the Being. But the Phoenix is the Christ. Now, yeah, again, there's too much to get into. I don't want to get into the weeds of the comic book lore, because number one, I'm not an expert on the comic book lore. I know the information secondhand. But there are other divine beings that fill out the rest of the Tree of Life. But Charles Xavier is related to the Being, because he's the father figure who holds the team together. And he guides and instructs and coaches and teaches Jean Grey, who must do her best to contain the Phoenix and not allow it to come out of her in the wrong way at the wrong time. So on my Tree of Life, I put her as willpower, but she could easily be put in Yesod, the ninth sphere, which is a sexual force. We need willpower to control our sexual energy, our sexual force. So it's very nuanced, right? These things are not like separated and unique and distinct and islands of them on their own. They're all connected. Just as all the Sephira on the Tree of Life, they're all interconnected. But these three, Jean Grey and Cyclops and Charles Xavier, they're like the I put them as the three parts of the monad. But I could very easily exchange Wolverine for Jean Grey's spot and put Jean Grey in the ninth Sephira and Wolverine as willpower, because that's something that Wolverine shows all the time as well. So anyway, this is a toss-up. You can have debates around this, but the point is that willpower and the sexual force are intimately connected and related. But I didn't want to leave this hanging for a discussion around X-Men and not mention the existence of this powerful symbol of the Christ present right at the very heart of the story of the team. Now, there is something called the Dark Phoenix, and the Dark Phoenix is like the antithesis of the Phoenix, and that's a whole other can of worms that we can get into. The Dark Phoenix is sort of like the closest equivalent in our understanding would be Divine Mother Kali, the Destroyer of Worlds. So the inversion of the Divine Mother in pure severity. And but the Dark Phoenix saga has all kinds of lore and intricacies related to it, and they take quite a few liberties with it. But in essence, it's what happens if the Phoenix gets like inverted, or that's probably not how people read the comic book. But we know that, just yourself, we all know from our own experience that the sexual fire, the fire of sexuality, which is the Christic fire at our level, the sexual force, the creative force, we know that can be channeled negatively to perform destructive acts, harmful acts to ourselves and to others. We know that. Anybody who's ever exploded with anger knows that. Or unloaded with someone with vitriol. You just unloaded on them. You just unleashed on them, just verbally even. So it kind of makes sense that in a hyperbolic, fantastical, mythological, science fiction superhero universe, you have to show that somehow. You have to show that, hey, this Phoenix phenomenon is this incredible, all-powerful entity, but it has a dark side. It's like the dark side of the Force. You need to represent that somehow, mythologically, in some character or in some way. So if you have the Phoenix, you might as well have the Dark Phoenix. Like you have the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force. That's essentially maybe the easiest way to broach the topic or contextualize it. But I didn't want to leave the discussion of X-Men without bringing it up and without mentioning it. In my opinion, and I'm no expert, as I said, I don't read the comic books, right? I potentially, very arrogantly, might proclaim that I don't need to. I see things like the image behind me, and I just receive. I'm just told, as always, what to say, and I say it. This is something that a good friend of mine is able to do. He can pick up a book and hold it in his hand for a few minutes and put it back on the shelf and walk away. And he will know what the most important takeaway points from that book are. He will receive everything he needs to get out of that book just by picking it up. He can look at the cover. He might look at the back, and he'll put it back down, and he'll walk away. and he'll know everything that he needs to know from that book. That's only true for me for things that I have to read. So, for example, I can't go over and pick up a cookbook and know all the recipes, right? I can't do that. But guess what? I'm not meant to do that. I'm not supposed to do that. Why would it be helpful to anybody to fill my head full of hundreds of recipes? What would be the point? But I can watch a few X-Men movies and receive in a moment in meditation, X-Men, that's the key. That's the key to part 3 of your video series. That's going to be the key to your crowdfunding campaign. That's going to be the key to explain to people, to use story, to use mythology, narrative, and allegory and analogy to explain to people what's happening right now and why the world needs an equivalent of the X-Men. And the X-Men begins with Charles Xavier. But Charles Xavier has a family fortune to work with. I don't. I don't. But the Sentinels are here. The Sentinels are coming for us. And right now, all the mutants are with Magneto, or a whole bunch of them are with Magneto. And there are all kinds of people with human 3.0 powers and abilities and potential, untapped, undeveloped human 3.0 potential. They're scattered all over the world. Who's going to find them? Who's going to find them? Who's going to bring them to a center? Who's going to help them access their innermost, and their latent human 3.0 abilities? And who is going to pull together some resources and some others who to support and to fund and networks and scientists and institutions, so that when these individuals, these human 3.0s in progress, have moments of brilliance and moments of clarity and receive the gifts of God and have the ability to bring them into the world, who's going to be there standing by to say, yes, we'll support this, and yes, we'll develop this, and yes, we can use this and use that? Who's going to be quarterbacking all of this? Somebody has to do it. Well, for better or for worse, I've been nominated a long time ago. And when I was in 3rd grade, I was already doing it. And I write about it in the book, and people will read about it if they donate their $10, because they'll get an instant download of my book for $10. You get your instant. I'm going to have it in either an EPUB or PDF format, both of which most e-readers will read, but the EPUB will actually be formatted for your e-reader. So if you have an e-reader, otherwise you just download the PDF and you can read it like that. So for $10, you get a digital download of the book. I'll have different support tiers if people want a paperback or a hardcover. So I write about how, as a child, I was already doing this work. Only I was doing it at the level, of an 8-year-old. And then later in theater, and then in high school and in university, I was doing it again. And in the theater, organizing people, bringing people together, and producing and directing. All the world's a stage, though, and the theater was not big enough a stage and not impactful enough a stage. And then in Japan, I was teaching English and I was doing it again, right? Same thing I was doing in grade 3, only now, because in grade 3, I was basically a second teacher in the class. That's what I was. And then in Japan, I was the only teacher in the class. But there I was sensei. There I was sensei. And when one of my students offered me a job, not only offered me a job, she offered me her daughter's hand in marriage and an inheritance of the family business to come and work for her private school first as an English teacher, but then I would learn the business and I would inherit the family business of the private school. And I had to turn it away and turn it down, and because it wasn't big enough. It wasn't what I was here to do. It wasn't big enough to stage. It would have been a waste of potential. But I've been doing this all my life, step by step by step by step by step, in accordance with whatever level I was at. And I'm doing it right now, in accordance with the level that I'm at. And that level is Theodore. I'm just a tugboat. Every week, I bring you guys what the tanker, what the cargo ship has on board, and I'm just a tugboat who delivers it to you. And it was just a single spark like this in meditation. Boom, X-Men. Of course. And why I made that X-Men Tree of Life years ago, and why I watched Danica's epic history on X-Men, that series that I showed you on YouTube. Her handle is Comic Book Girl 19, by the way. I watched her series on X-Men years ago. I can barely remember any of it, the details, but that's not what matters right now. What matters is the fact that in symbol and allegory, maybe, just maybe, you may not agree. You're, of course, entitled to have your own opinion, your own perspective on it. But for my money, X-Men is the perfect allegory for where we are at and for what humanity faces. And if I were a betting man, I would put money on it. And I'm not a betting man, and I am putting money on it because the whole of the campaign is going to turn on this allegory and using this allegory to explain something to lay people and initiates alike, to fans and non-fans alike. What Atlas Conscious Arts is about, and what we hope to accomplish, and why we need your help, why we need your $10. Why 10? Because it's a perfect 10. It's perfect. It's all we need. And why 10? Because it reminds us of the binary duality, the 1 and the 0 that needs to be reconciled. Because when you put those two things together, you get 10. And that is why, coming back to what Benjamin was saying earlier, that is why the Romans chose the X to be number 10. Because it's something and nothing. And it's all and nothing. It's the alpha and the omega. It's the polar opposites, binary duality, but the X unites them. It's all there. It's all there. So why would any other amount be better than the perfect 10? And I'll let you in on a little secret just between us. Just between us. When you see it like this, there's some interesting things happening here. First and foremost, you have A, E, O. Now you're going to say, no, that's a 1. That's not an I. But to your subconscious mind and your unconscious mind, visually, a 1 is also an I, an E. That's A, E, O. In a different configuration, it would be E, A, O. So it doesn't matter what order you do it in. A is the lungs, O is the heart, E is the third eye and the crown chakra. So it's the mantra of heart mind is A, E, O. And 10 minus 4 is 6. And 6 plus 3 is 9. And in our presentation, we explain what Tesla said about the secret of 3, 6, and 9. And the 1 and the 0, the all or the nothing, or the 1 and the 2, right? The binary duality, and how the reconciliation is the 3, but it reconciles the 6 and the 9. So all of that is encoded and present in a 10 for human 3.0. But you also notice that written this way, it's also a 10-4. And 10-4 is the affirmative. 10-4 is what you say on the radio when you received. You can also say Roger, right? In the army, they say Roger, but the truckers and stuff on the highway, and I think the police and so on, they say 10-4 when you've received, when you've understood, when you've comprehended. Which is what this is all about. Helping people become human 3.0 who receive, who comprehend with their heart mind, with their A-E-O. And the power of 369. That's all in here. It's all in here. And it's actually encoded into the very logo itself. Right? That this logo is A10-4. A 10 for conscious arts is a 10 for human 3.0. This is the depth and intensity and how pregnant with meaning everything is that has gone into this, including the alpha and the omega and everything that we've talked about, the Cairo, the Pax Romana, and remember, we've gone through the other symbols here, the from Bluetooth. This is the trident. Here we have J.R.R. Tolkien's monogram. We have Excalibur, the sword and the stone. And Arthur is all Father who art in heaven, and Thor, right? And there's Mjolnir, right? That's Art and Thor, and Thor becomes Arthur, the sword and the stone, because Mjolnir becomes Excalibur, and there's that X again. So it just goes on and on. I've gone through this, you guys, in the video, and you'll see it again. You can just follow me, or wherever you follow me. You'll but next week as well, I might as well show them. So there is so much. It's like so pregnant with meaning and significance, these symbols, and how it's all come together, that this is really my Hail Mary pass. This is really like, I'm taking this with that level of, I've devoted my life to this. I've been waiting my life to this for this. So this really is my it's either going to work or it's going to be a catastrophe, right? Moment. And so really I have no choice but to kind of take this like Wolverine slash Charles Xavier approach, and balancing those two natures, and make this happen, right? So that we can, as I say in the next video coming out, so we can return to the days of future past. When humanity built pyramids, when we walked on water, when we traversed dimensions. And these were common things in our ancient past, in our golden age, when we were levitating 200-ton megaliths, and some of the other phenomenal feats of megalithic engineering that we see around the world that could not be repeated today with any known technology that we have. With no machine that we possess could we duplicate some of the marvels of the ancient world. Well, we're going to return to the days of future past, and traversing the 0-point dimension into the higher dimensions, and receiving from higher dimensions, so that we can express here on earth as it is in heaven, and be true human beings, triune human beings, X-men, in other words, Christic men and women. To give that a shot, and to have a team, the X-Men, a team led by the equivalent of a Charles Xavier, to give that a shot and bring Magneto and his clan onto our side for this purpose. I think it's worth a shot, and I think it's worth $10. I don't think it's too much to ask. And that is my impassioned plea and my case for the esoteric significance of X-Men for humanity at this time in our history. And yeah, well, there it is. Do you guys have any questions or comments? I want to thank you guys all for coming out today, as always. And I am working hard on getting the third part of that video out that you guys haven't seen yet. I talked a little bit about, some of the stuff you'll see in here. It's going to be captured hopefully in a more concise way. because I've already done a bunch of slides and stuff. I just didn't want to show you that particular presentation like I've done in the past. I only wanted to show you presentations from videos that you've already seen, or show you slides from videos you've already seen, because I'm hoping that this last part will have a bit of an impact or a wow factor, or some, I don't know about surprise, because now that I've given away the X-Men angle, I don't know if there's going to be much surprise in there, but I am trying to build some drama into it. One of the feedback that I got from I can't remember who it was. I think it was maybe Benjamin Ochoa, maybe, who told me that I need some music and some drama in the videos. So the first two videos, I admit, are the material is kind of dry. It's mostly informational. It's like trying to get across. It's like a download, as much, showing as much as I can in the time that I have. But this third video, I'm trying to make it more emotional and more dramatic. I'm trying to appeal more emotionally, and I think that the majority of what ends up in the final campaign video, which has to be like 5 minutes, the majority of it is I've got to pull from this third part of the presentation. So I'm hoping that's the way it's going to turn out, and I'm fairly confident at the moment, but we'll see next week when I guess I show you guys, and you guys can decide for yourself. In the meantime, I've also got to, get all the technical details and finished and wrapped up and onto the website, and get all that polished and looking right and proper and working proper. And I got to make sure I test the fundraising capabilities, like the payment system and everything. I've decided that I'm not going to use a crowdfunding platform. I'm just going to use my own website, and I'm going to use PayPal to collect funds. We'll see how that goes. If that, for some reason, isn't going well or doesn't work well, then I may have to pivot to using a platform, but hopefully that won't be the case, because PayPal is one of the most reliable payment system platforms in the world, and I've got quite a few integrations on my website, so hopefully all of that will work out. But I'm rambling and wasting time trying to give you guys time to post questions, but it looks like you guys are checking out, so thank you all again for coming out today. I hope you found this valuable, and I look forward to seeing you next week, and for showing you what new is on the horizon, what we've been working on, and all the rest of it. So until then, God bless you, Godspeed, and as always, inferential peace. Take care.